My name is Janelle Ortiz. I'm 42 years old, a former Navy corpsman, and for the last 3 years, I've been teaching trauma medicine at the Naval Medical Center in San Diego. I've seen saltwater spray mingled with blood, felt the quake of helicopters above makeshift field hospitals, and worked under tarps straining against desert winds. I've pinched bleeding vessels between trembling fingers. I've carried Marines through smoke so thick it swallowed the sun. I've whispered farewells over brothers and sisters I couldn't save, and held strangers steady until help arrived. But to my family, I'm still the girl who stayed single too long, the one who traded brunches and baby showers for body armor and deployments, the daughter who didn't settle down, buy matching dish towels, or give my mother something to post about on Facebook. Last Christmas, as I pulled out my chair at dinner, my mother glanced at the ribbons on my dress uniform and muttered, just loud enough for the room to hear, "You're only playing brave, honey. That doesn't make you a hero." The mashed potatoes hadn't even gone around yet. I didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. Years of triage zones teach you how to keep your face from cracking. My brother chuckled into his IP. My father sighed and changed the topic. I sipped my cold peppermint coffee and swallowed everything. My stories, my pride, and the rising urge to shout. They never asked where I'd been. They didn't know about the evacuation near Marja, or the commendation they mailed me because no one was there to pin it on. They had no idea I once kept a sailor alive with a torn shirt, a pen casing, and silent prayers. At that table, I wasn't a medic. I wasn't even a woman with scars. I was just the inconvenience they couldn't crop out of the holiday photo. So I smiled, I chewed my ham, in silence, and reminded myself, like I have for years, they don't see you, not because you're invisible, but because they never tried. 8 months later, at a gala on the USS Midway, someone else saw me, someone whose handshake made headlines. He didn't call me worthless. He called me something else. And that's where the real story began. Dust from someone else's tires. I cut the engine and stayed there a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the porch light outside my parents' Chula Vista house, blinking like it couldn't decide whether to live or die. I wore my dress blues that day, sharp creases, shoes spit-shined, ribbons in perfect rows, not for show, not to pick a fight, but because it was the one thing that still felt like me. The door opened before I even knocked. My mother peered out, eyes dropping straight to my uniform. "Oh," she said, "you wore that. No hello. No hug." Inside, the air smelled of nutmeg and polite tension. And the dining table was laid out with a faded red tablecloth, wobbly chairs, and the same chipped serving platter they'd had since I was a kid. My father came out of the den, gave my uniform a glance, and said, "You know you're not on base anymore, right?" I gave a quick nod. "Still fits." My brother Luis strolled in, his button-down crisp, the watch on his wrist probably worth a month of my combat pay. "Well, look who's here," he said, slapping my shoulder like a manager greeting an underling. "Navy GI Jane reporting for dinner." I glanced at the place card on the table. Petty Officer J. Ortiz. Not Janelle, not daughter, just rank, like a stranger invited out of courtesy. Dinner started with a prayer thanking God for family, health, and people who make smart life choices. Subtle. As turkey slices went around and strained smiles held, Luis launched into a speech about his venture capital firm's new acquisitions. My mother talked about her book club's cruise to Ensenada. My father recounted again the time he played 9 holes with a retired governor, cleared my throat, and began telling them about a little boy named Rafiq. He was 8, caught in a blast outside Helmand. I found him pinned under metal, his chest rising like a bird trapped in a cage. I carried him 2 miles to the LZ, half on muscle, half on sheer terror. He managed a crooked grin through the pain, I said. I hadn't even gotten to the part where I improvised a chest tube with a pen when my mother cut in. "Let's not talk about war at dinner, sweetheart." She turned back to her green beans as though I'd never opened my mouth. The silence afterward was thicker than any dust storm. I set my fork down. Even the stuffing seemed judgmental. That night I sat alone on the patio steps, under a sky so bright it made my eyes ache. Inside I heard laughter. Deep, genuine laughter. The kind only people unburdened can manage. And in that moment, I realized something. As the ghost at their table, not fallen, not gone, just unseen. They trained us to wait for the command. No matter the chaos, no matter the screams, orders first. That's how you survived. Believe it. Until Marja, it was my third deployment. By then, I'd seen enough to know better. Aita fragments. Collapsed lungs. Burned so deep they wiped away fingerprints. I learned to keep my voice steady when the calms turned into screams, when the ground shook like the ocean in a storm, when someone shouted, "Corpsman!" like it was the last word they'd ever say. We'd been dispatched to help a civilian aid convoy that had strayed off its route near Sangin. Bad maps, worse luck. By the time we got there, everything was chaos. Burning vehicles, mothers screaming into the smoke, kids scrambling beneath twisted rebar and chunks of cement, looking for pockets of air. My team leader was already down, a round through his thigh, trying to wave for the medevac chopper with one arm while keeping pressure on his wound with the other. Then I saw her. A girl maybe 9 or 10. Dust and blood streaked across her cheeks, one arm limp at her side. She crouched behind a toppled produce cart, clutching something wrapped in cloth. I didn't hesitate, didn't ask permission. I went. The radio squawked, full of static, and then the order. Negative. Do not approach civilians. Unknown hostiles. Hold your position. I couldn't hold. I was at the girl's side in seconds, skidding on my knees through shards of glass and rubble. Her eyes met mine, huge and dark, terrified. But not for herself. Her gaze kept dropping to the bundle in her arms. A baby, barely moving, tiny chest fluttering like a bird's wing. I checked the infant first. Pulse thready, skin cool. Malnourished but alive. The girl's forearm was bent where it shouldn't be, ribs probably cracked. But she stayed conscious. In halting Pashto I whispered, "You're safe. I've got you." She didn't cry, just nodded. I tried calling in coordinates for an evac. Silence. So I wrapped them both in my navy jacket and ran, across 150 meters of open ground. Rounds cracked past my ears. One bullet snapped the strap of my trauma bag. Another spat dust across my boots. A Marine laid down cover fire from behind a smoking MRAP. My lungs burned. My ribs felt like splintered wood. But I kept going. We reached the MRAP, found a stretcher inside. We stabilized them. Both survived. So did I. Barely. 2 cracked ribs, a concussion, and a row of stitches snaking along my hip from shrapnel that caught me mid-sprint. If you want to know what happened after the medevac lifted off, and how one unexpected moment changed everything, stick around and hit that subscribe button. Some battles follow you home, and my story isn't over yet. When I woke up in the field hospital, the first words I heard weren't thanks. They were, "Next time, follow orders." They didn't demote me, just filed an official reprimand. Failure to comply with command in combat. Translation, she's reckless. Later, someone slipped a folded scrap under my cot. No name, just 6 words scrawled in faded pencil. 2 souls still breathing because of you. At the bottom, a faint fingerprint in dried blood. I've kept that scrap ever since. Not for any medal, not for bragging rights, but because in a life built on obedience, I need to remember why sometimes breaking the rules is the only right thing. When I came back stateside, I never told my family. They wouldn't have asked, and even if they had, I doubt they'd have wanted the truth. Then the envelope arrived. Thick ivory paper. Raised lettering. The kind of stationery that whispers, "You should feel honored to be included." My name was typed across the front in crisp, expensive font. Petty Officer Janelle Ortiz. No Janelle, no sis, just rank and surname. Like I was being summoned to a briefing, not invited to a celebration. Inside was an invitation crafted like a luxury brochure. Louise's wedding, Temecula Valley, early summer, black tie optional, RSVP by the 15th. Rehearsal dinner at a vineyard, vows overlooking rolling hills, Brunch hosted by the bride's family. It read like a travel ad for perfection. I stared at that envelope for nearly an hour. Not because I didn't know my answer, but because I knew exactly what it meant. They were inviting the polished version of me, the safe silhouette, the sister who'd keep her stories and scars hidden under polite conversation and chiffon sleeves. I could already hear my mother's warning. Don't cause a scene. Wear pastels. Smile more. But I'd learned that silence is just another way to erase someone, so I decided I would go. But not for them. I booked a flight, reserved a car, and laid out the same dress blues I hadn't worn since a shipmate's funeral. I polished my ribbons until they shone and pressed my creases sharp enough to draw blood. Not because I wanted eyes on me, but because I refused to carve out pieces of myself just to keep everyone else comfortable. When I stepped out of the rental car at the Vineyard estate, the valet paused. His gaze skipped over my medals, up to my face, then down to my polished black Oxfords clicking against the pale stone walkway. "Oh, thank you for your service," he stuttered. I gave him a polite nod. "You're welcome." Inside, the place glittered like a magazine spread. Polished tile floors, ivy spiraling up white pillars, a string quartet playing notes so soft they seemed woven into the scent of peonies. Everything gleamed, curated for perfect photos. I was not part of that image, not really. The first words out of my mother's mouth weren't hello or welcome. Only, "Oh, you wore that?" Her gown was misty silver, hair twisted into a sleek chignon, pearls nestled at her throat. Her lips twitched, but the smile never touched her eyes. I kept my voice even. I didn't notice a dress code banning military service. She flinched. A tiny muscle near her eye fluttered. Then she sighed. "Well, we just didn't want a spectacle. It's Luis's day, after all. Naturally, wouldn't want a decorated corpsman overshadowing the man with a startup that pairs wines to your Spotify playlist." My father thrust a glass of Prosecco into my hand without asking. The photographer gave me a passing glance and moved on, and when the bride's mother leaned over to whisper, "We heard you're some kind of doctor. How brave." I corrected her gently. "Not a doctor. I'm a Navy corpsman." Oh, she blinked. "Like a nurse?" "No, like the person who plugs a hole in someone's chest while bullets fly overhead." Her face went pale. I smiled, just enough to unsettle her, and walked away. The ceremony was staged outdoors beneath a silk canopy edged with white orchids and eucalyptus. Rows of white chairs fanned out like military formations, perfectly aligned. Everything was soft, precise, luxe. Except me. I slipped into the second row. Beside me sat an empty chair, no name card, no cushion. Just space, a silent gap, a polite boundary. No one spoke. Not my cousin fiddling with cufflinks, not the college friend scrolling Instagram. They all knew who I was. They just didn't know how to be around it. I watched guests drift in, sequins flashing, suits in rich navy velvet, laughter drifting across the patio, light and brittle, never reaching the belly. I scanned the rows of chairs for familiar faces. Most people either looked away too quickly or flashed me wide, polite smiles like I was someone they were obligated to acknowledge but didn't quite know how to place. The quartet launched into some gentle classical tune. I didn't know the name. Never cared much for background music when blood and dust filled my ears. Then the bride appeared, delicate, radiant, a vision spun from social media dreams. Luis stood rigid at the altar, jaw tight, fingers interlaced. His eyes found mine, just for a flicker. Not pride, not affection, not even annoyance. Just calculation, like he was trying to figure out how to crop me out of the shot. This was his polished day, his headline moment, and I was the wrong-colored thread in the tapestry. I didn't flinch. I stayed still, shoulders squared, boots planted. I didn't clap when the officiant made the half-hearted joke about eternal devotion. I didn't cry at the vows. I'd witnessed promises break under gunfire. After the ceremony, people trickled inside for the reception. Chandeliers dripped crystal light. Champagne towered high enough to catch reflections of the candles below. Servers floated by in spotless white jackets. I made my way to the table labeled Extended Family. No personal name card. Just a folded tent that read Petty Officer Janelle Ortiz. Dinner was lemon thyme salmon, asparagus spears, truffle risotto arranged in perfect circles. I sliced through the fish with practiced care, chewing in silence as conversation sparkled around vineyard excursions and hot yoga retreats. Dessert arrived. Mango mousse crowned with edible gold leaf. Camera snapped photos from every angle. I finished mine without a word. That's when my cousins swooped in. "So, what exactly do you do?" one asked, swirling a neon cocktail that looked more nightclub than wedding. I met his eyes, neither warm nor cold. "Stop bleeding under fire. I teach medics how not to die. I decide who gets a second chance at breath. I know every bone in the body, in 4 languages." They blinked. One finally said, "Whoa, I thought you were just angry all the time. That's kind of badass." I nodded. "It is." They didn't ask more. They didn't know how. So I stood, excused myself, and stepped onto the balcony's edge. Night air, cool, scented faintly of lavender, and quiet. Resentment. Inside, laughter resumed. Perfect, safe, untouched. But I didn't feel alone. Not this time. The air felt charged, like something unfinished waited beyond the lights. I'd only taken a few steps from the balcony when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, heart thudding, and the world tilted. Standing there, flanked by 2 Secret Service agents, was a man every American has seen behind a podium. Silver hair at his temples, eyes sharp despite exhaustion. A presence that hushed the entire room. The President of the United States. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. Then he reached out his hand. "Are you Petty Officer Janelle Ortiz?" "Are you at M?" "Yes, sir." He held my hand a second longer, eyes locked on mine. "I've read your record," he said. "You've saved more lives than many officers in full careers. I've wanted to meet you for a long time." The room behind me froze. Glasses mid-air. Forks paused above plates. I didn't look back, but I heard my mother gasp. The president turned to the crowd. She didn't just serve. She innovated battlefield triage. Because of her, survival rates in certain zones improved nearly 40%. That's not just courage. That's brilliance. My chest tightened. Not from pride, but from the stillness of truth finally spoken. Someone clapped, then another, but it was the hush behind me, the stunned hush of family that carved deepest. The president leaned closer. "Expect a call soon. We need minds like yours." Then he was gone. Later, the photographer called for a family photo. I stepped back out of habit. But he said, "We need you front and center." So I stepped forward, stood between Luis and my mother, under a velvet sky. The flash went off, and everything shifted. Because now I knew I was never worthless, just unseen. And finally, I saw myself. If my story struck a chord, drop me a comment below. Tell me your battles, your victories, your aha moments unseen. Let's remind each other we're never alone. And if you ever feel invisible, stand tall anyway. Speak your truth. Because I promise you, you're not worthless. You're just waiting to be seen.